for turning out at adult formation today, which marks the kickoff of the Stewardship 2027 campaign. You may think, what do you mean by 27? I've no idea. I was thinking it was 26, but I've been told it's actually the kickoff of the 27 campaign. We started earlier this year because we want to get some of the focus on, of course, the important bit, or one of the important bits is pledging the end of the year, but we also want to highlight the idea of using the gifts of God to benefit God's people, which hopefully that's you. So I asked Father Rick if he would do the introduction, the inaugural event in our 27 campaign, and he kindly, after some considerable persuasion and a great deal of money, agreed that he would do that on the one condition that there were 20 people or more in the audience. So I overcame that by recruiting about 15 to the commission, so they're all here. And thank you very much indeed for coming. Rick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Now if I can get this to work. Okay. David mentioned that he had asked me to do this, how this all came about. David was elected to the vestry, as you know, because you elected him. And he was assigned the joyous task of being the liaison and overseeing the work of stewardship. It's like being asked to be the guest preacher on Trinity Sunday. By the way. Pay no attention to that man over there. David said, I don't really know what to do with this. And he said, I remember that 4 years ago, and it was the first time I preached at Old Donation, it was on Stewardship Sunday. And he said, I don't remember exactly what you said, but I remember being very moved and impressed by it. So here I am. And how do you get people to show up for a thing called stewardship? And so I thought, okay, what can I come up with as a catchy title? So you hate stewardship too. I figured people would react to that and either go, I don't understand, what do you mean you hate stewardship? I love stewardship. Anybody in that camp of I love stewardship? The treasurer of the church. When you hear the word stewardship, what feeling do you have? A big sigh. Oh no. What's coming next? Giving. Money.
Pressure.
Pressure. Time. Talent. Treasure. I thought you said pressure. But sometimes there is pressure, isn't it?
Yes.
There's always this deadline. We've got to have those pledges in by some magic date. Are they ever in on that date?
No.
Does it matter?
No.
You're going to take it no matter
Well, yes. I mean, never in the history of the church did the church go, pledges didn't come in, we're not having church next week. So on one hand, it matters, but it doesn't matter. What was your reaction when you saw the title? So you hate stewardship too?
Me too.
Me too. Me too. Maybe something resonated within you of like, oh, maybe there'll be some truth being told here. I don't like the term stewardship. I never have, probably never will, because I've now made a career in saying I don't like the term stewardship. It's not that I'm against the notion of what it stands for, I just don't like the term. It's basically an Old English term, as in a lot of words that end in ship. Can you think of other words that end in ship? Membership, leadership,
Hardship.
hardship, yeah.
Oh, hardship.
You know, you take the word ship and you add it to any noun and you make another noun that basically now is stating a condition or a state of being. We have in the church, we have stewardship. What other ships do we have in church? Membership. Worship. Which essentially is saying it's taking the word work, because liturgy is literally means the work of the people. Discipleship. Somehow when we add ship to it, it sort of makes it sound official and professional and all that, instead of saying let's all just be disciples or let's all be good stewards. We turn into this other thing. I also don't like stewardship because I think we're being dishonest when we talk about it. We'll talk about what the meaning of being a good steward is and where that comes from, and I'm going to do a little bit of that. But then what happens as soon as we, and sometimes before we even finish the talk on what stewardship means or being a steward, what then happens? You're handed something.
A pledge card.
A pledge card. So all that good sort of spiritual, religious, feel-good stuff comes right down to you being asked to do something. I don't like stewardship when it comes to thinking about financial giving, because I think it's misnamed. I think the act of making a commitment of oneself through their time or talent or treasure or all three isn't about stewardship, it's about discipleship. It's about making a decision to follow Jesus. It's about making a decision to commit to God in and through the church. So I've been on a campaign for a number of decades to call it discipleship rather than stewardship, but that's like, you know, tugging on Superman's cape or spitting in the wind. It just doesn't work. I like talking about that thing we do, and every church does it, in the fall. We'll call it the pledge drive, the stewardship campaign. I like calling it what it is. It's fundraising. Now I'll add the word pastoral fundraising, because it's not just fundraising as it is for any organization. It's pastoral in that it implies a relationship that people have. There's a relationship between the giver, the gift, and that which you're giving to or for. Because most important in our being the church is our relationship with one another and with the church. We're a community. Stewardship, as most of us experience it, is that annual pledge drive that's conducted each fall, and it's designed to secure the financial commitments from members to fund the following year's mission and ministry. It's probably my least favorite topic to talk about, which is amazing that David got me to do it. And I just want to warn you that he is heading up the group that's going to do the annual pastoral fundraising campaign. And if he can get me to stand up here and talk about my least favorite thing, you better hold on to your purse. I think, like a lot of things we do in church, we have it backwards. Stewardship is not the thing that we do before we hand out the pledge card. Stewardship is the thing we do after the pledge card has been turned in. Yep. Stewardship is everything that the fund development team, that David has already put together a group. Well, how many people? 8, 9 people?
Yeah, 9.
Which, I mean, it's April, people. He already has a team together looking at this stuff. They've already met. And I think that's going to change the way in which Old Donation is looking at this whole thing about what it is to recognize the gifts that God has given to us corporately and individually, and what we do with those. But stewardship begins after the pledge card has been turned in. And it's what that group does and what the church as a whole does to build the relationship with the giver after they have given. Now, the word stewardship, it's still a decent word, and it has a good history, and it means a great deal. How would you define it? What does it mean? Forget the financial thing. What does it mean to be a steward?
Taking care of.
Taking care of.
Participating.
Helping. Commitment.
Being responsible.
Responsibility, being responsible. Yeah, to be a steward, essentially, and if you look at it throughout history as it's developed, that term, in whatever language and whatever culture, it always has this sense of, it's how we care for that which is in our charge. There's always a sense that it's not just ours, that we hold something in trust for someone else. The English word steward originated from the Old English word styward or stigward. And it's a compound which means the sty or stig means a house or a hall or a stall or a pen, an enclosure of some sort. And word means guard or keeper or ward. So literally it translates into hall guardian or housekeeper or stall manager. Historically, it refers to the trusted officer that managed a noble estate. But at its core, it was the keeper of the sty. The sty. Now, can you think of any word, any way that word sty is used today? A pigsty. Right. Now, there's no strong evidence that anyone who cared for the pigs was ever called a steward, and yet it's a leftover of that old English term of the caring for the sty. And I think it's somehow appropriate because whatever else stewardship is, there's an aspect of stewardship that has to do with cleaning up our mess. And pigsties are messy. That's why we've all referred to our children's rooms as pigsties. We sometimes, as the church, make a mess of things. So part of stewardship is cleaning house. Now, a little bit of background, and just in terms of not the word, but where it really comes from, an understanding of it from Scripture. There's some key biblical themes that speak to this thing called stewardship. There's the stewardship of creation itself. In Genesis, humans are tasked with managing the earth. Literally in Scripture, it says we are tasked with dressing and keeping creation, showing a duty and a care for the environment. Another biblical theme that touches on stewardship has to do with ownership and accountability. The 24th Psalm, as well as many other places, states that the earth is the Lord's and everything therein. And that, of course, means that we're managers of this, not owners or possessors of it. One of my favorite books was written by a biblical theologian by the name of Walter Brueggemann, and it's called The Land. And he talks about the history of Israel's relationship with the land, and describes it in two ways. That the entire history of Israel's relationship with the land is whether we see the land as a gift or whether we see the land as something we possess. And as you read Scripture, the Hebrew Scriptures in particular, you see that Israel's relationship with the land is constantly in flux, and it goes back and forth between whether they see it as gift or whether they see it as possession. And every time they see it as possession, guess what happens? It's taken away. And then they learn the lesson and they receive the land back as a gift. And that works for a while, and what happens again? It's taken away. A third principle that we see through Scripture, particularly in the Hebrew Scriptures, is the Sabbath principle. And that is the command to let the land rest. That comes primarily out of the book of Leviticus. And it highlights our stewardship as limiting us from the exploitation of resources. And we learn too often the hard way that if we use something too often, we use it up, and it's no good for us anymore. Those three things reflect, those are kind of three principles, but they also touch on three ways in which we see stewardship initiated and expanded upon in Scripture. In the book of Genesis, remember Jacob? And as he was going along, and he rested one night, and he had this vision of the angels going up and down. You know, Jacob's ladder. It's actually more of a stairwell, but anyway, in that dream that Jacob has, God reaffirms to Jacob the promise that was given to Abraham, that his descendants would inherit the promised land. And as a result of that dream and that remembering that covenant that Abraham established with humanity, Jacob says, if God will continue to be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I can come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And I will set up this stone as a pillar, which shall be God's house, Beth-el. And of all that you give me, I will give back a tenth to you. That's the first place where anything is mentioned about the giving back to God out of what God has given. It's a covenantal relationship, two parties that are involved in that. Later we see a second purpose in giving, and that is in Deuteronomy, where the people remember that the land and its harvest came from God. Not just the land, but the harvest. And then when it was a time to give, say, to the temple, and that's how people would make an annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the temple, and they would make their offering. That I have received my part of the land as an inheritance according to the promise of God. And so I must give back to God to remember what God has first provided for me, and will make it remembered for future generations. Interesting part of that gift back to God, it was also encouraged that that gift that was given back to God, a portion of it would be used for a big celebration. So it wasn't just given away, it was used for a big party. I've seen that played out in churches oftentimes, that there would be a big celebration at the time of the ingathering of gifts. A lot of people say we shouldn't be spending the money on ourselves to do that. It has to all go to God's work. Well, part of God's work is to party together as a community. The third reason for giving in the Hebrew Scriptures, and all this is carried over as themes in the New Testament, was to support the work of the priests, and also it was the priest's responsibility then to take care of the less fortunate, often referred to as the sojourners, the aliens in our midst, the orphan, and the widows in distress. Those themes continue throughout the New Testament, where basically the understanding of being a steward was to have a managerial kind of oversight of that which has been given to us. What's clear to me, at least, in this whole biblical understanding of what stewardship is that it's not an individual thing. And too often, I think we treat stewardship as a me thing, what I'm doing for the community, as opposed to beginning and go, what is the community's responsibility? What do we do as a community So I think we have it backwards in that sense. There's also one thing that comes through the witness of the Christian scriptures, and that biblical stewardship understands that one of the primary factors that makes us a good steward is the life that we live intimately spent with our Maker. It has to do with a relationship that we have with God. And that makes sense, doesn't it? How can we be caretakers of what God has given to us corporately if we don't have any knowledge of or relationship with that God? How do you care for what belongs to another if you don't know the other? So that's something that is unique. No, I won't say that. It's not unique to the Christian tradition, but it is a growing understanding of what it means to be a steward that we see in the New Testament that maybe was not as understood as strongly in the witness of the Hebrew Scriptures. Questions, thoughts, anything? What's coming to mind right now while I figure out what I want to say next?
Well, I mean, yeah, the stewardship, you go, what can I contribute? But you also go to, why can I contribute more? Or
Okay.
what's deficient in my ability to contribute?
What's holding you back?
So there's some trepidation when it comes, all right, it's time to give. What am I able to do?
Yeah, what is it that's holding you back? Like holding you back from, is it that fear that I won't have enough to live myself on the daily? Or like, how do you, I don't know, put your...
Yeah, thought on that. And this is certainly a biblical theme that runs all through Scripture. Human beings tend to operate out of
self...
a mode of scarcity,
Yeah.
thinking that there's only so many resources out there. And okay, somehow I got a hold of some of them. And I need to be careful with those, because if I'm not, they'll poof. And so I lock them up somewhere because somebody else will take them. And that's operating out of a sense of scarcity. There's just not enough to go around, as opposed to the witness of Scripture, which says operate out of a sense of abundance. There's always enough. But we like that notion. How many people like that notion? Would you? Yeah, and some haven't raised their hands because they're not so sure about that. I love that notion. I don't trust that notion. Yeah.
Well, I think a person's personal experience will also take part in the decision, because when you've been through scarcity and there are not enough resources, and you live through that plays a part into the fear. So it's
Right.
not, a lot of times societal pressures will do it, but also personal experience, I believe, that will impact how much you part with,
Right.
because you've lived through the not having enough, not having enough for food. And we all like to think that there is enough. But from personal experience, there's been times where that doesn't happen.
Right.
There isn't enough. And so, that plays a part in some people's decisions and their fear of parting with what they have.
Right. Yeah. And we need to own that as a corporate entity, that we participate. A world has been created that is not just and fair. And although, yes, we can say, if you took all the resources of the planet, there's more than enough. But they're all not available to us. there's an old joke about, on Giving Sunday, and the preacher stands out and says, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is, in this room, there are all the resources we need to run this church. That's the good news. The bad news is, it's still in your pocket. And it ain't leaving there. And that's a reality that we do live in this world, and some people have experienced the hardship of that more than others. Carol?
And that's very true, what you were saying. But even as you were saying it, I was thinking about all of the times that people who have the least in many communities, the people who have the least are the first to give to each other and to help each other through a situation. And that really, I'm still wrestling with it, because I just read a book recently where there was a very impactful chapter where this woman who had 12 children and her husband died, and she lived in New York City, so it's not like she lived on a farm where she could support herself. And she came back from the funeral, and she lived in housing, in public housing, and her mailbox was crammed full of money, and people came by with chickens and whatever. What I'm saying is, if the people who have the least can give in that way, that really tells me something. And I think a lot of it has to do with when you had to rely on God to provide, truly God to provide. It's amazing what can happen.
Right.
But most of us are not. The more we have, it seems, the less we're willing to trust that.
Right.
And yet that happens every year in our church. We make a budget that is beyond what we brought in, and more money comes in it rises to meet it. And so that's just one example.
Yeah. That's been my experience too, that it sometimes seems that those that have the least are the most generous.
Well,
And-
there is that.
Yeah.
Like you split the chicken in 4
Yeah.
ways, and you split it with 4 families, right? But like, I think there's a distrust of the corporate
Yeah.
giving, because that doesn't always come back
Right.
in a helpful way.
Yeah.
It does, right? Like, there are good things that come out of the church, but a lot of times it's not felt personally.
Right.
And so that mindset, it's hard to give in a corporate way,
Right.
to a organizational way, when you could just buy a bag of groceries for the neighbor.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's that sense of organic generosity that comes among families and close-knit communities. It comes about because folks have a sense that who they are and what they have is part of this community. And the larger the community gets, the harder it is to see that. And that's one of the great learnings, I think, that comes through the biblical witness, is this whole notion, whatever we call it, in terms of our understanding of what we have and who we are as part of God's creation. It helps us to shed the idea that we own things. And if we are, I mean, the fruits of good stewardship, for lack of a better term, is it molds us into being better people. Not just saying the right thing, but putting our money and our lives where our mouth is. Increases our willingness to help others. And it also then points us toward a higher power, toward the divine. There was a hand, someone, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. This is making me think about the deep difference between the cultures in which the scriptures were written and the culture that we live in now, right?
Yeah.
So we're very individualistic now.
Right.
So when a priest starts talking about stewardship, he or she has to overcome this barrier where it's like, okay, I've got my life over here, and if I give something to the church, I'm doing something I don't have to do. You know, I don't even have a community unless it's a family, and I've got my life over here, and then the priest has to sort of be very nice and say, well, could you please consider giving something you don't have to, as opposed to saying, we are a community.
You're looking at my notes because I think we have it backwards, and that what we start with as the church, we try to teach people, individuals, about their own individual stewardship. I think that's not the right place or the best place to start. The best place to start is to talk about the community, the corporate stewardship. The church has resources, and the church can best teach individuals about their own individual stewardship by telling the story of its own stewardship. And to that end, David and I have talked about this as before we move into the season in the fall where we ask people to contribute, that we tell the story first of the church's stewardship. What does the church have available to us? Three things, actually. The church has property. Okay? How do we use that property? Do we use it to the best of our ability? I'm not asking to answer that now. There'll be a session on that later. He's going to lead that, by the way. Also, the church has some financial resources. Right, Madam Treasurer?
Indeed.
And what better way to model for you what you should do with your personal finances than to look at what does the church do with its finances? That great mystery. The great mystery of the church is not that Jesus died and rose again, but the great mystery is what does the church do with that money? But to understand how that is used to the glory of God and the upbuilding of the church. And what's the third resource the church has? People. And it's a primary responsibility. How does the church care for you? How does the church care for you? And steward you, manage you, control you, build you up, all the things that a good steward would do. So stewardship starts with the group, not with the individual. And I think that can change the way in which we view the whole thing. Couple things, real quick before, time goes fast. Some people that spend a lot of time doing research on how the church operates and what's working in the church and not working in the church anymore. Some people strongly believe that we are at the end of the model that we currently use in the church to raise money, commonly known as the Stewardship campaign. Increasingly, churches are having difficulty making that work. Folks are not participating in it to the same degree that they did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Now, some will think, well, yeah, there'll be a resurgence of that, and that will change. Well, never in the history of ever has that happened. But there's no reason to fear with that, because what we currently know as stewardship is a relatively new thing. Now, it may be all that you've ever known in your lifetime. But the current model, in terms of talking about stewardship and then handing out pledge cards and having people put stuff in envelopes and giving that back, how long do you think we've done that in churches?
long as I've been alive.
Long time?
100 years, maybe.
As long as I've been alive, that's the way it's been done.
Yeah. It's been done about 70 or 80 years.
Yeah.
It was a new thing. It was an invention of the mid-20th century, which I think is really rather interesting. Historically speaking, how the church existed was at one point, the European model was that there were manors, lords of the manor, lords and ladies. And their responsibility was to provide for the people that lived on the manor, including their spiritual well-being, and so they funded the church. People did not fund the church. Landowners funded the church. Move very quickly into the New World. We come to the colonies and the newly formed. There aren't lords and ladies of the manor anymore, but there are people with a bucket full of money. You know, you have entrepreneurs and you have the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Mellons and the DuPonts and all those folks. And most churches in the early days in this country were funded by people who had large sums of money. And that was the good they did for the community, was to build the church. When I served as the dean of the cathedral in South Dakota, that cathedral was funded by money from the Astor family, John Jacob Astor, who his wife Charlotte had a fondness for caring for the indigenous people, or as they referred to them then, the poor savages. And so they created a mission school for the native children and built a cathedral. The cathedral was even named St. Augusta's Cathedral because Charlotte's middle name was Augusta. And he said, I'll give you the money to build this cathedral if you name it after my wife. Anyway. After that, people began to go, we still don't have enough money to fund the church. And you know how they funded the church then? They rented the pews. We've all heard about pew rental. And so money came in. That was the first participation of people who actually sat in the pew and worshiped, other than the Astors or the Rockefellers or those big name people. Income from the church came through renting pews. And so there were subscription lists. And then somebody came up with an idea, because missionary work began to be started in those far-off lands where there were other heathens that needed to be converted. And somebody came up with the idea, well, let's take up a special offering for that and put it in an envelope, and we'll send it off to wherever. And that worked so well that people went, well, why don't we do that here at home too? Let's ask people to write down how much they want to give for the upkeep of the church for this next year. And that's where our current model of stewardship came from. As other resources dried up, because the benefactors were no longer willing to give the money that they once gave, people were no longer willing to rent the pews to fill the church, people found another way. God provided another way. So even if our current method is drying up, don't be afraid, because God has always provided a way for funding to come, and it always has. I think one of the keys to it, and this is where we're moving from stewardship into what I would call pastoral fundraising. I think a key is for us just to be honest about what we're doing. Talk about stewardship, yes, but talk about it now in April. Talk about it throughout the year. Stewardship may in fact be the underpinning of what ends up being our financial giving. But when we're talking about financial giving, don't shy away from saying, we need money, period. and offer people the opportunity to give out of whatever means feels good for them to give. Some people need to give to bricks and mortar. Some people need to give to meet the needs of other people. Some people just like the idea of giving for all that stuff that the Altar Guild does. Give people the opportunity to give to what turns them on. We too often prescribe for people, this is what you need to give for and why, and this is your rationale. What we need to do is to enter into a conversation with people more about what it is that excites them about their ministry. One of the most exciting things I've heard of recently was a church that came up with a thing, and they called it the Audacity Project. And they came up with the craziest idea that everybody bought into, and they decided to use a significant part of their resources that year for this new project. And then next year, they dream up a new project, and a new project, and a new project. And they fund that no matter how crazy it is. And what they found is people are drawn to that innovative approach. That's just one way. I'm not saying that's what we should do here necessarily. It's a way to approach things in a new way. We have a couple minutes left. Let me just stop and see your response to all this. I need about another 26 minutes, but I don't have it. Joe.
I'm sort of a newbie with this stewardship thing. I really don't know an awful lot about it, but I'm learning. One thing that I would say we all have is we all have love in our hearts, and we have a life that goes on giving, like in a circle. And I think that one of the things that I feel is important to put all this into perspective is when people can give to the church by using talents that they have and skills that they have to encourage people to do things that could raise money or just to help people without necessarily putting your hand in your pocket. But by going out and giving in a different way to help people within the community through what we have that we've been given by God, which are skills, talents. The other one didn't spring to mind, but that's kind of a way of thinking that I have.
And that will work if we take the opportunity to actually talk to people and have, for people to share what their resources are, what their gifts are. When I mentioned that, I know there'll be some time in the fall before we hand out cards to you for the church to talk about its stewardship, both in terms of its property and its finances and its people. There's going to be a session or two also. I know Karen Meredith is interested in doing this to talk about the how to identify your own gifts and skills and what you can do with those. A lot of times we do that and help people identify what their gifts and skills are, but then we never give them an opportunity to plug in anywhere. Last question. I have one more thing I want to say, but
I was gonna say.
Go ahead.
yeah.
I think it's important that we trust that the money's used wisely. And for me, particularly having been on the vestry before, I realize that every penny we spend, we think about it and decide how it can be used most effectively. And I feel like it's certainly not wasted. It's spent the best way it can spend. And I think to have trust in our administration too, and our clergy, that for things like what the ministers fund, where you can help people in need. I mean, that money's, I'm sure, is spent very wisely. Much more so than if we had probably given it to an international organization, because you don't really know a lot about it, and you hear stories about people, not managing it.
I think a key is our relationship with one another in doing that. I'm a firm believer in that, how a community, how the church can best steward its resources is not just a question of how it uses that which is given to it, but how it continues to be in relationship with the one that gave. It's a full circle. It's not just, well, we spent it well, that money you gave to us. But what about the relationship between all those ministries and all that stuff that we do and the individual or other organization where that money came from? Too often we don't spend the time, the necessary time in developing and fostering that relationship. Last comment, and we've got to close.
When I get my college writes me, they want money, they tell me all the things I can give to. And as you're saying, you give money, but we don't know where the money goes. I just give you the money. But I think if you're going to ask a pledge, you might list the different things that people might be interested in supporting. So we do all, make a list of them, and so when you ask them for money, which of these would you like to support?
Yeah. One creative way of doing that, a lot of churches will do it, and it may have been done here at some point too, is what's called a narrative budget. So you don't just see a number for the spending of things, but what that actually goes for. And I know David is interested in creating kind of some videos and telling the story of the various ministries that take place here. And that excites people, because then you want to give to something that you feel good about. Anyway, we'll stop there. But happy to talk to people at any point about this. And if you're interested, you want to learn more, come and be a part of the Stewardship Commission.
Well, room for everyone.
Yeah. So,
Thank you very much.